Welcome to episode 111 of the XrmToolCast. In this episode, Scott and I speak with Anthony Sheehi, the Principal Program Manager at Microsoft, responsible for Power Platform Pipelines for All. Microsoft has been investing heavily into pipelines, and Anthony walks us through all the details. So if you've ever made something in one environment and need to move it into another, this is definitely the episode for you. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the XrmToolCast. With me, your host, Daryl, always raising the bar, and Scott, I love my mood lighting Duro. Scott, how's it going?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Daryl. You're always raising the bar. Yes. And yes, I'm always with my mood lighting. So yes this is this is our style. I'm intrigued where your bar is, though. I have to say, where is the bar that you raise? Do you have it
Do you remember how it was this high before? Well, now it's this high.
Wow. It's constantly raising.
Slightly higher, yes. Yeah, it's always higher. Yes.
I would expect it to be higher than this, to be honest. I mean, because...
Well, it was. It wasn't, but it will be. It will be higher than that, yes.
Right. It's just like very slowly, but like raising, it's like throughout.
I'm not promising miracles. I'm just promising effort. That's all.
Yes. It doesn't say what speed. It's like an asymptotic raising. So as it reaches, it's like that progress bar, when you're downloading something, and it gets to 90% really quickly, and then it starts to slow down. Is that the same as your bar? Is it?
Yeah, I'm already at 98.5. So that the next 1.5% till I die is going to take my lifetime, basically. So.
Wow, this got really serious really quickly. Talking about the demise of Daryl and how high your bar will be. Wow.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about progress bars. Okay, all right, yes, that too.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, I mean, and what's your bar made out of? I mean, is it like a, is it steel? Is it kind of titanium? Is it like carbon fiber? I mean, is it a pipe? Is it a pipe, Daryl?
It might be a pipe.
Is it like a bit of metal piping?
That would be perfect for our current episode today, Scott. Yes. Well done. So today we have as our guest Anthony Sheehi, a product manager too at Microsoft, a Power Apps ALM user experience enthusiast from the greater Seattle area, and he went to Cornell. Yeah, I've heard of it, and he's on our show today to talk about Power Platform Pipelines for All. So we've made some changes to our changes are coming out. They actually aren't even. We're actually recording this in the past, right? Because they won't actually. What he's talking about today is under NDA, so we have to keep it quiet until it's actually released. Then we actually.
I'm feeling nervous just saying that, Anthony.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But that's what we want. We want the latest and greatest. We want it all. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Yeah, rest assured. Most of what I talk about today has already been released. There are just a couple of other features that we wanted to get out there before the end of this month. So. That probably will be rolling out over the next couple of weeks.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Anthony. We really appreciate it. And we love this when we kind of get stuff that is so new, it's hot off. The paint is still drying on make.powerapps.com.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you guys so much for having me. Yeah, this is an awesome podcast you all have.
Of course. Oh, glad to hear. Glad to hear.
We'll take that. Yeah, thank you.
So pipelines, they're not just pipes; they're actually lines. Just kidding. That's kind of a bad intro. But so give us a quick intro of maybe where we have been recently and what's kind of new, and then where we're looking to go forward. I guess maybe as a
right. So I'll do a quick intro to pipelines.
That's great.
You two might be familiar with it, but for anyone who's watching who's not, pipelines for Power Platform. Pipelines for Power Platform are a streamlined way of moving your solutions from one environment to another environment. And then if you don't know what solutions are basically like project folders that you can put your apps and other components into. And you can move that folder from a development environment, let's say, to a test or production environment. And we call that healthy ALM. So that's the pipelines rundown. I would normally show a video of it, but I will try to guide you through it as best I can. So that's the foundation of pipelines. And right now, or rather before this release that we're calling Pipelines for All, pipelines had to be installed manually by an admin. through a Dynamics 365 package that we called Power Platform Pipelines. And in that whole install and configuration process, an admin would have to create or choose a designated host environment for pipelines, kind of like the brains of the operation, right? And then they would have to manually configure all of the environments that they wanted to attach to these pipelines, and then create the pipelines shortly after that. So this is a multi-step process that often took either 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, depending on how long or how intricate the admins wanted to make these pipelines and how many environments they wanted to associate, etc. So
and if you knew what you were doing too, I'm guessing too.
Right.
I'm guessing
Yeah.
if you didn't know, it might take a little bit longer. I don't know what this button does, or I don't know what this means. So yeah.
Press it anyway.
we for sure tried to make it, as intuitive as possible. But of course, there's still documentation reading, ramping up, and figuring out how it works. So we said, why not make this easier? Why not make it a lot more streamlined and truly democratize ALM for everybody using Power Platform, rather than just this one long process that admins have to go through in order to set everything up. So
can I stop you there just before we move on? Because that's a really great intro and a really good segue to a question that I'm dying to ask you. And that is pipelines. There's so many different types of pipelines, aren't there, really? Because there's Azure DevOps pipelines, and there's GitHub actions with release actions, and then there's the ALM accelerator as well. And then there's obviously manually doing it kind of through some, CLI stuff or whatever you wanted to do that way, or even through the UI. How does pipelines for Power Platform sit alongside all these different types? Because you talked about, and the reason I asked this, is you're talking about democratizing release pipelines. Could you kind of give a little bit of background for listeners on what you really mean there and how it's positioned alongside all the different other options?
Right. And since Pipelines for All, this has been a huge topic of discussion, obviously, because all these other pipelines are generally a lot more rigid and strict. And that's why Pipelines for Power Platform was previously something that was only able to be set up by admins. But the way that Pipelines for Power Platform sit in the scheme of all of these different types of pipelines is that it's essentially an easy way to export and import project solutions, or these solutions, as I'll say. So right now you can manually, like you said, export and import these solutions with your apps. But it takes a while. Like it's a very long process of exporting them, which will download it to your local machine, and then going to import them, which the import could also fail. Importing takes a while, so you kind of just have to like sit there and wait for it to happen and ensure that it happens successfully. So that process itself for each individual maker can take up to like an hour, basically. So Pipelines for Power Platform was introduced last year in order to mitigate the time spent by makers and allow admins to also govern the ALM process for Power Platform. Now, today I'll be talking about two different things, two different, I guess, dichotomies that we've created within Pipelines for Power Platform, and that is the custom host and then the now on by default platform host. So the host I talked about earlier with that long setup process, that is traditionally the custom host. And that is because an admin customized, or like they set it up themselves, and then they were able to customize the pipelines within it and then delegate those pipelines to makers specifically. This new platform host is something that, like I said before, democratizes this process by allowing makers to create very lightweight, simplified pipelines that would essentially replace the importing and exporting process. So it's not anything that escalates any permissions. It's not anything that would provide a maker any more power in terms of exportability and importability into environments. It's more so it empowers them in the way that they would be able to get all the goodness out of what we have to offer in pipelines, such as solution checker, which will automatically ensure that the solution can be imported to the environment. There's other validations that we go through in order to make sure that your environment variables, your connection references, every component within your solution is going to work with the target environment that you have selected. And in addition to that, we also have a couple of cool features like schedulability, allowing you to schedule your deployment at whatever time you might find the best. And then also Copilot generated deployment notes, which will summarize your entire solution and provide that as like a little snippet on the details of the deployment itself.
So it's lowering the bar to entry into healthy.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
It's raising the bar as far as requiring less. It's yes. So it's simplifying the. Sure. I need to abandon that thing. So
just go with it.
Okay. So you mentioned that there's the custom host process, which is what we previously had, and then you are introducing this platform host process, which is a more streamlined way of doing it. And previously, I mean, coming from a dev background, we're thinking, there's Azure pipelines, there's GitHub Actions, there's different ways to be moving code from one environment to the next. In this case, the only thing we're really doing is we're talking about moving that solution file from one environment to whatever the next environment happens to be. And in the custom host, you get a little more control over it. I don't know, does that run like as a part of like an Azure pipeline as well? Or can they configure that to be, hey, we use Azure DevOps here, where you want it in there or not? And then the second follow-up to that is the platform host. Is that something that's accessible in the standard pipeline flow that they may already have in place?
Yes. Okay. So I'll answer the first part of your question, which is with this custom host, like, can you integrate it with like Azure DevOps or more customizability? The answer is yes. So with custom hosts, admins have the ability to kind of hook into these extensibility points. So it allows you to create pre-export and pre-deployment steps. For example, like checking something into like source code, for example, can be done through a manual process. But on the horizon, we might have something that people who go through that process will very much like. And then to answer your second question, this platform host is something that it's essentially an implementation into Power Platform that has recently been released. Pipelines is actually the first of all of the features to onboard to it. So that is why this platform host is so important, because it essentially enables first party Dataverse based functionalities within Power Platform to be enabled by default without having an admin install that Dynamics 365 package that I talked about earlier. So we have a couple of upcoming features that will be able to hook into this very, very well. And we thought that pipelines, because right now it requires the manual package installation, would be a really good candidate for the first of its kind to use this, to use the platform essentially to make it work. Right.
So if we're talking about someone they're just a single admin at their company, they're managing 2 or 3 environments, let's say 2 environments, and right now they're just exporting out their solution mainly and importing the solution in the next environment. Like, that is the use case for these platform host based pipelines. Just, hey, rather than you having to wait for it to export and back it up and then hope it works, you just set up the pipeline and you click the button and it just automatically pushes it from that environment to the other environment and notifies you when it's done, I guess.
That's right.
And so that's money for that large group of the population. And then there is the other group of the population. Maybe they already have stuff in place. And they'd like to be able to, I don't want to mess with this stuff. I want someone else to kind of handle that. Let's see if we can tie it into our own process. And that's where the custom host kind of idea would come in that sense. So the platform host then, is that something that you no longer are required to have the permissions to deploy it in the production environment because it's running as a part of this other process? Or do you, as a user that clicks the button, still have to have the rights to deploy it?
The latter is correct in that aspect. Like I said before, this new Pipelines for All feature set does not escalate any permissions at all that a maker would have. So if a maker could import to prod before, they can deploy to prod now through this easier process. So, and then vice versa, which is more important, is that if they didn't have import access to prod, they will definitely not be able to import using Pipelines.
So the person that's doing the approving to actually import is still going to be the same person that was doing it before.
Right. So does it, when you're importing it into that target environment, does it simulate as though you'd gone through the user interface and clicked import solution there for all of the components that are going to be owned by you, the flows that are created, all the apps, they're all owned by you? Does it have that same effect as is when you're using that pipeline?
Yes. Actually, you reminded me of something that is also upcoming and should be released by the time that this podcast goes live. We are integrating sharing into the pipeline's deployment process. So in the case of you being the owner, you will also be able to share components to others in the target environment. In terms of personal pipelines using the platform host, this won't be available yet, but for the custom host specifically, especially ones that involve SPN delegated deployments and approvals, that SPN or the whoever's approving the deployment itself will be able to ensure that, oh, these people are should be shared access to this specific component. And it makes it a lot easier because if whoever is importing into the target environment, let's say prod or maybe test for better use case in this scenario, doesn't whoever's importing needs to share access to a test team, for example, they won't be able to do that unless they go into they wouldn't have been able to do that unless they go into the target environment and manually share it, right? So we were let's streamline this process even more and just request the sharing permissions upon the deployment itself. So this way they don't have to go in and wait for the import to happen and then manually configure that themselves. So just a little tidbit. That was kind of a tangent, but yeah.
No, it's great because cool what's happening there is it gradually through those pipelines, you're starting to automate all of the things that are very, very Power Platform specific that you would have had to do through if you were going to create a Azure pipeline or something, even using the Azure pipeline actions, all that you PowerShell scripts and all of that complicated stuff that you would then normally have had to do. You're starting to then bring that into pipelines because you've thought about what do people do? What are the challenges do people have? And adding those features shows that you've kind of got people's back in making those deployments easier. And I know, for example, that's feature that was added in about being able to roll back, redeploy if something goes wrong. Again, that's huge. That's massive.
Yeah. And redeploy, we wanted to make sure was available to these personal lightweight pipelines as well, because anyone can make a mistake. It's not just a centrally governed pipeline that would need these rollback capabilities. It's also those who were like, oh shoot, I just deployed to production and broke my app, and I'm just a maker. Help me out.
Is this redeploy or rollback? What is that feature called?
So we've coined it redeploy.
Okay.
Yeah, we've coined it redeploy. So, essentially, it is a solution version rollback. Which we've tried to explain, but yeah.
So if I'm on version 10 and I push version 11 out and oh crap, I just broke everything, I want to go back to 10, then you just say I want to roll back to or redeploy version 10 again.
That's right.
Does it deploy it as version 12 then? Or does it magically uninstall, reinstall, and give you 10?
So it's a solution downgrade. So it's the same process as a solution upgrade, but we've enabled it so that at the API level they can which was not allowed before. It can actually upgrade to a lower version now, so it'll show up as version.
It's huge. I mean, it's such a tiny. Almost, it didn't get enough, in my opinion. Anyway, it didn't get enough ta-da, massive fanfare. It almost needed this kind of everyone would be like, wow. But yeah, because when you think about it, it's something that has been there for so long. It was always fix forwards. That was always what you had to do. Always fix forwards. And suddenly,
I had a previous version, and I edited the version number and then redeployed the previous version, so it was a higher version. So I would,
I think that's what a lot of people were doing. You're not alone.
Yeah.
So. It's okay. Everyone makes mistakes, Daryl.
Yeah. No, that's cool. So you mentioned SPNs,
yes,
and kind of the identity. So that's
service principal name, correct? Because I'm a little bit shaky on that. Okay, so that's like a service account that's a naming company that becomes the owner of said records or whatever.
Right. So that's like I said, that is more for the advanced scenario that the custom host based pipelines will provide. So for these lightweight personal pipelines using the platform host, we don't have extensibility in place now, just because there's not really that governability of the individual maker pipelines that make sense to enable things such as like approvals and extensibility when they would be able to just manually import and export. It also is it's a headache for makers to try to figure out themselves. And they might not even have access to all of that either. Coming from a background that maybe isn't as Power Platform heavy, I've been on the team for about a year and a half, so I've really tried to make my mark as somebody who wants to advocate for the citizen developer, the advocate for the citizen maker, because there's a lot going on with ALM, and that's why democratizing it is so important. I think there's a lot of value in making something that's normally very difficult, but also very important, super easy. And that's what this feature aims to do. I know that there has been some conversation going on since the release of it, and there's definitely some concern. So I wanted to help mitigate that concern via you guys. So one major thing with this new dichotomy of custom host versus platform host, there's one thing I want to note that's very, very important, and that is the platform host will not step on your custom host. So the custom host, if you already have pipelines set up and you're an admin and you've centrally governed everything already and everything is perfect, you're rest assured you're fine. Like this new implementation will not affect those environments that you've already associated with pipelines. And in addition, if somebody were to create a personal pipeline and link their environments with the platform host, and just to preface, an environment can only be linked to one host at a time. So the admin will have the power to go in and force link an environment to the custom host if it's already linked to like the platform host. So they'll have that elevated capability to be able to govern what environments are attached to what hosts. So there's that too. And then this is going to become even easier when and I don't know if you all have heard, but environment groups and rules was just announced this morning, actually. So that is a brand new feature that allows admins to put environments into groups and set specific rules for them for the entirety of that group. And one of the rules that we are in the process of making right now is the default deployment pipeline rule. So this will pair very, very well with this ALM maturity story, as I'm calling it, where makers could have individual personal pipelines that they're using to get their solutions from like a dev to a test environment. And then an admin wants to come in and say, okay, I'm ready for this advanced ALM capability using my custom host. And then they can bulk associate the environments that all these makers are using, I guess, individually for their own development. And they can bulk associate them to a centrally governed pipeline with like extensibility, like approvals, and maybe Azure DevOps linkage, something like that. There's a lot of possibilities with the extensibility. But yeah, so that upgrade story from having the individual pipelines of like, oh, I just wanted to get my solutions from dev to test, and I'm making these individual pipelines versus having that one central pipeline that the admin has created. It'll be a really streamlined story of being able to upgrade it. So
just to kind of run it through a scenario then. So maybe we've got a couple of apps being worked on. We've got two people working on their separate apps and they're working in their own developer environments. Then they could both start off by having personal pipelines deploying into a single UAT environment and then production environment. So it's like, okay, well, normally I'd just export this stuff and then I'd go into my UAT and then I'd import it. But then, we want to make this automated. You want to make it easier. So you get all that advantages you've talked about being able to have it scheduled and being able to have, visibility of it and rolling back and potentially sharing when that comes out as well. So suddenly you've stepped up in that level of maturity. And so you've got two people who've got deploying that were using personal pipelines. Would there then be a point where you'd say, okay, you were doing it with personal pipelines, but now actually we want to have more of a custom host to say, actually, we're now going to have those two development environments linked using a custom pipeline into our UAT in production because we want to govern it more using like environment groupings and stuff. Is it like that kind of maturity step, and what are the kind of triggers you'd say that people would be looking for to move in that maturity journey?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think for each individual organization, you're going to have different levels of, I guess, desire when it comes to ALM. That's one thing. There are definitely a lot more hands-on admins that I've worked with who have set up pipelines and want like more centrally governed ALM process. And that's really cool because we've enabled them to do that. And like I said, through that custom host creation process, it's feasible. There are also the other side of the spectrum, which is the admins who don't necessarily have either the time or the hands-on capability to set up all of these pipelines or to set up one centrally governed pipeline and manually associate each environment to that pipeline. So this feature is for them. That's kind of why we called it Pipelines for All, because it was a way of turning pipelines on by default and allowing makers to take advantage of this capability when their admins either maybe didn't want it or the admins didn't have time to configure it, or they didn't see the value in it. That was also the other thing that we found that was blocking adoption too of pipelines, is that it's a long process to set it up, and then it's also a way of, like, if it wasn't as important to them, it wasn't something that they took priority on. So, and then makers were not engaging in healthy ALM. Like it's something that it's kind of a shift in the way that Power Platform is looking at ALM, but it's a shift that we thought was in the right direction, because it's a way for makers to take advantage of these capabilities that might not be available to them now. And I don't want to. I realized what I just said about makers wanting it but admins not wanting it. I didn't mean it in the way of like that probably sounds really bad.
I think it's more that the admins don't want to have to bother with it, right?
Yes.
Like,
that's
they don't want to
that's
have
more
to
what I
bother
meant.
with it.
Absolutely.
They don't want it. That is like, I've got other things that I'd rather focus on. Just like a developer that's on the Power Platform. Like, I don't have to focus on security. I don't have to like, that's done. That's the platform. I can focus on the things that are more important and things that add value to the business.
Yes,
so
that's exactly what I meant.
Not that I don't want security. I want security. Not that I mean, I want it. I just don't want to have to spend a lot of time on it. And that,
right. So and also, Scott, to kind of iterate on that, there's some utility in having pipelines store all of the solution files too that makers are importing and exporting. Of course, with each individual maker creating their own pipelines, it's going to be a lot of pipelines. So that's also one of the reasons that you might want an ALM maturity story, is that everything's going to be in one centrally governed pipeline, which means all the files are kind of aggregated in one place. Not to say that it's super difficult to, audit or sift through whatever solutions each maker is deploying, or you still see like a list of solution artifacts that are being deployed in like the tenant, let's say, because that's where the platform host sits, is kind of on the tenant level. But that can be a lot, right? So if they wanted to really go in there and crack down and manage it a lot easier, and also take advantage of the extensibility, like checking things into GitHub or something like that, or messing with the approval process, making sure that all of these makers are approved or are deploying in an approved way. that can also be set up through like the custom host. And that's why admins today have really wanted to take advantage of pipelines, because they wanted to crack down on like a centrally governed ALM process. But for those who haven't, this will be the backup. This will be like the default experience that's on, because like I said before, it doesn't escalate permissions. It doesn't allow makers to do anything they couldn't do. It just makes it easier for them to do their short-term, like small scale.
It's a good entry. It's a good entry into that healthy ALM that you were talking about, and that
exactly,
being able to then move forwards. And it may be enough, I guess. I mean, from what you're saying, because all of the features that you're adding into it, it may actually be enough for them to stay that, and because it's governable by the administrators centrally, and it's not going to circumvent any security, and it's not going to allow them to do things that they shouldn't be doing. It's a safe way of deploying. So just to go back to your point about the not being able to step on toes of a custom host, and you mentioned that an environment can only be associated with one host.
Yep.
So can you have what's the sort of the possibilities around multiple development environments deploying into the same downstream outer loop environments? Can you mix and match custom hosts with platform hosts? Can you have multiple development environments all deploying into the same with multiple different personal pipelines?
So there's a couple of questions there, and I'll try to answer them one at a time. So platform host and custom host, like I said, I've treated them separately because of the way that this single host associability like concept works. And that's if an environment, whether it's a source or a target environment, is associated to one host, it can't be used in a pipeline in another host. So that's where the force link capability comes in, where admins can upgrade, or not necessarily upgrade, but just associate something from the platform host to then their own custom host.
So basically, each environment has like a platform belly button where it connects to only one of these things. That's the environment, and that's in and out. Like for taking in pipelines and for outgoing pipelines, it is either using the custom host or it's using the platform host. It can't use both, but you can have multiple pipelines of that type deploying to that from different environments potentially as well.
Right. So if you had like 10 different developer environments, and each maker created a pipeline, a personal pipeline to this shared test environment that's also associated with the platform host. And once the first dev creates a pipeline, then that target environment is associated with the platform host, because that's how the linkage process works. So then anybody else in that environment, anyone else using the platform environment will also be able to link their own dev source environments to the target environment, like very seamlessly. I mean, it's seamless to begin with, but there's no issues is essentially what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And I want to be clear on if it only has one pipeline, both for accepting pipelines and for outgoing pipelines too, like that you can't switch. So if someone in dev creates the dev environment and they create it as a platform host and 500 people start using it, and then, okay, let's go from dev to QA or QA to UAT, or they pick another environment to deploy to, that has to use the platform host because the source one is a platform host then as well?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
So you have to, as long as your entire pipeline from itty bitty environment to your production environment has to be on the same host, pretty much.
Yes. Yeah, that's how that works.
Okay.
And then, like I said, it's for those who haven't set up custom hosts yet that this feature is useful, because obviously they're going to have shared environments like test or production that haven't ever used pipelines before. But if you have used pipelines before, then associating your current dev environments to an existing pipeline in the custom host makes more sense, because you're already used to governing that process. There's definitely going to be different problems for different organizations, or different intricacies rather in pipelines configuration as you mature, and wherever you are on that spectrum of, I don't know what ALM is, to, oh, I have this locked down, So there's there's definitely room for, I guess, customizability too. And then feature improvements will happen as we get more and more feedback. I'm very open to any feedback that anyone wants to provide too, because I think.
So I think we're getting to the part of the show where we give people homework.
Yes. Okay. Anthony doesn't know this, but most shows, our guest comes on, they're volunteering their time, they're giving us their experience, and then we give them homework that we expect them to complete without any other additional assistance from us. Just go off and do this stuff for us magically. Yes. So go ahead. Did
we fail to mention that, Anthony? Oh dear. Sorry. Yeah. So here's my piece of homework. So one of the most common things for makers across the spectrum, right? So even when you're building, if you're building an application which is it could be quite a small application for I'm working in sales, and I want to build an application to manage, I don't know, some particular process that's very, very small. Usually it's got some customs, it's got some data associated with it, so maybe like some records, some categories, or some particular locations, sales regions, or something like that. And usually when I deploy, I also want to deploy that data with it, and so not only just the first time, but also updates to that data. Maybe my next version of my app has got some new sales territories or some new products that I want to include, or something like that. Is there any plans to have that ability to include that inside these personal pipelines?
So when you say include data specifically, when I think data, I think of like a Dataverse table per se.
Yes, Dataverse table records. Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, within a solution specifically, you should be able to include a Dataverse table and deploy that through pipelines.
The record's not the metadata, though.
Yeah. We're talking about actual rows, like a product table. Like, if I'm managing a sales team and I've got like north and south and east and west sales team, and I've also got like 10 products that I'm managing, and I've got my app, I want to be able to make sure that when people using that app in my production environment, they can go in and they can see the products that they can select and the regions that they might want to select. So I need to be able to make sure that I can move that between my environments, not have to manually go into that target environment and then edit the records and enter that data.
Yeah, and to be completely honest, I'm not super familiar with this space exactly. However, I've also worked extensively with environment variables, and I want to say there is some way that you can connect to Dataverse, and even a Dataverse environment, where it doesn't necessarily have to be a table either, but depending on which environment you're going into, like for example, if you wanted to have data and test and then change that data to prod, that's also kind of where that environment variables section of the deployment configuration process also helps out. And forgive me if this doesn't answer your question at all either, but it's something that I can imagine would be extendable to this use case, but I'm not fully sure.
Most people go away and say, "Oh, let me think." Well, it's homework, right? After all, so you don't have to give us the answer.
Right. Okay.
And this feature we already have available through the data migration utility and packaging up that solution, having that solution package that includes the data portion that's done after the actual solution metadata is installed, right, Scott? So you're just saying, is there a way to be able to do that through these platform hosts?
Because if I create like an app source package today, or if I create a solution package, and I want to deploy that through catalog or through just using the ADO, the Azure DevOps tasks, I can actually import that solution and the data that goes with it. So it's a sort of like it's a combined thing, and the configuration migration tool has this sort of ability to export this sort of XML file with all your Dataverse data in it that then gets imported automatically after it's imported the solution. So it'd be awesome if pipelines could do that as well.
Okay.
There we go.
That's our homework.
This is good feedback. See, and this is why I asked those extra questions, because I have my own foundational knowledge, and it's really good to hear the full use case of kind of what you're asking, because it helps me understand better what you're looking for. So I'm glad that you went through that, because now I understand what we're talking about here.
I don't think anyone's actually got back to us and said, "Hey, we did it. We finished our homework and handed it in for marking." Has anyone done that?
We had, yes. The Chrome extension, Prettify my whatever. No, the Power Platform, the CLI one. We had that CLI one a few months back.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, that was
yes.
awesome. Yeah, exactly. So yes.
So I was like, "Wow, that's awesome! You already did it. That's great." Even Jonas gave me homework to do, and I didn't even do it all. So
that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's no pressure.
I have one more follow-up question. And I want to know how applicable it is from let's say a dev environment, right? A dev environment that you might not have that specific data to. I want to know more about the user base that would be using this capability, like more so of like because obviously return on investment is something that is very important when we're prioritizing items, as you might know. But
let's hope
so yes, so I wanted to make sure that like this use case from like a development environment to a test environment, for example, which is most of what we're doing with pipelines. When you're migrating data, how often is there data to begin with? Like from the development environment specifically, because that's where we start. And then the solution, so you can have as many stages of pipelines as you want, right? But generally there's only two or one or two stages to most pipelines. And that's in a canonical dev test to prod scenario, right? And you have your dev environment and you're building your app or whatever, the solution metadata, the table metadata, it's all in frameworks, and then you deploy to the test environment, and then once that happens, your environment or your solution is kind of like locked in that way, and then the test to prod stage will initiate when everything's good in test, or when whoever deployed is deeming everything the correct quality in test. So within that framework, or that the pipeline, I'm curious to know more about how kind of like data migration would work between those stages, because the solution itself is static as it goes through the pipeline. So I guess you're more saying from dev to prod, I guess in this canonical scenario, we want to be able to migrate a certain like table of data, for example, or some database all the way through the pipeline. So this way in prod, the end user has access to whatever database that is.
Yeah, because it could be like anything really to do with the way in which the application works. So you want to make sure that when somebody's testing or using it in production, it's the same as when you were building it in dev. Just another example is quite often you'll have a table that contains a list of statuses with colors, right? And the Canvas app will load those statuses in, and it will load the colors in and show them in the right color given the status. And of course, you don't want to hard code that in, because you want to make it easy configurable, right? So in the next release of your app, you can change the color, or you can change the status or something like that. Or you might want to have make it the status is filterable based on another table lookup or something like that. Like certain regions have got different statuses, or those kind of that sort of metadata, which becomes harder to manage if it was in code, and much easier to manage if it was actually in data. So it's you want to make sure that that's consistently deployed in the same way as you want to make sure that all your metadata is consistently deployed throughout the environments.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
cool. I think I have. Yeah. Go ahead.
Like trying to figure out like I would say probably a third of the projects that I'm on have some state where it would be helpful to use that. It's kind of difficult, time consuming to get that data migration set up from like a dev to another environment or to get that whole data package stuff set up. So I've just limped along with manually pushing it. But yeah, there are some cases when you get to larger or more not requirements. You have more strict requirements. Hey, this has to be set, and then that's when that would be a helpful feature to have. So, but I'm going to give you I would guess about a third of deployments would be interested in using that, and currently have a workaround in place that they could happily remove if it was a feature that was there.
Cool, and thank you
Scott,
guys for providing that too, because obviously I could do my own research and I could figure this out in the more data driven way, but also I wouldn't really know because it's qualitative at this point because the feature is not there. So I'm very curious and hearing as much as I can about the use cases and obviously the personas that would use it. So
well, of course, this is a great opportunity to say to our listeners, like, if you're listening to this podcast and you've got any projects that you're currently working on, please send them to us, and we can pass them on to Anthony, or even send them directly to Anthony. And if it's something like a feature that you would want to do a +1 or a +100 or whatever.
yeah. Love that.
So Anthony, I'm going to give you one more question, and then we're going to try to dive through whatever it is that you want to share with us before our time here. But can you set it up to deploy multiple solutions at once, or is it single solution to solution? And yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Anthony's got a big grin on his face for those who are listening on Spotify or podcast.
So this is definitely something that we know it's been since the conception of pipelines. It's something that we wanted to have, because deploying multiple solutions is something that has a lot of value for a lot of organizations who have very large projects, and they have inter solution dependencies, which is a very, very common case, which we're also dealing with in terms of the import failures we're seeing with missing solution dependencies. And there was actually a feature that got released, I think a couple of months ago, to try to make that error more actionable and to be able to install missing dependencies, or at least see them and know where to get them from. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question about multiple solutions specifically, it is in the roadmap. It's happening. I don't know exactly when. Right now, and if you think about the pipelines experience, if you're familiar, pipeline sits underneath the solutions blanket. So in the system, or in the information architecture of the Make.Power Apps experience, you're looking at you have to go into solutions first, choose the solution that you want to deploy, and then you'll see the pipelines light up on the nav bar. So that's where it sits today. With the multiple solutions introduction, there's this change or shift that will need to happen. But we're thinking about it very, and I don't know how much I can share, of course, but
let's just stop there, and I'll give you one more thing that I don't know if you thought about, but the thing that to throw in with hey, we want to make this work, because I very recently had a smaller project. They had one solution per table, basically, because they were having some dependency issues. So that's how I walked in. Okay, so I needed to push solution A for table A to add in some additional columns, and then I had to push solution B, which included those columns on a different table or view for the ones in A, and then I had to repush A and remove the old columns that B used to be referencing. So I had to do 3 solution pushes in order to really do one major change. So even that may be way down the road, but that's another very valid work case of, hey, I've pushed this change, I've created this column, I don't want it, it's the wrong one, I'd like to remove it, I need to go ahead and update I need to add the new one, I need to remove all the dependencies, and then I need to remove the old one. And it's not just a single solution that gets deployed through that, it's multiple ones. So that's another wrench that you get to think about too.
Yeah, no, this use case is something that we totally see. It's something that would be really, really beneficial, and it's going to take more work because of the shift that needs to happen in terms of where the pipelines page lights up. But we're working on it. That's all I can say.
I love that the pipelines have got so if you look at where they started, and I love that there's been this constant release in the pipeline, in fact, of features in that area. It's just amazing to see that constant flow of like, oh, and now it does this, and now it does this. Because, right in the early days, it was never promised to be like this, like solution to everything. It was like, okay, there's another option, but it's going to get better and better and better. And that's exactly what's happened. And that's just fantastic to see. So I really would encourage all of our listeners to go and check it out. If in the past you might have looked at pipelines and said, oh, well, hasn't got enough functionality for me, you can go and re-look at them, because it is all of this new stuff that Anthony's just been describing is really making them, I think, much, much more of a viable option if you were doing stuff in Azure pipelines or whatever.
Yeah. It's definitely been a long journey since GA of last year, and we're trying to keep making it better, trying to expand it to all audiences, because we know that ALM is really important. It's something that a lot of our own customers, but also other, I don't know, all organizations really have reached out to us and said, yeah, this is something that matters. Like, low code application development is a feat in its own aspect, but how do we manage it? How do we ensure that people are going from dev to production in a healthy way? Because once we enable these citizen developers to start creating these apps, and they might not have a development background, we got to make sure they're doing it right. And that's what Pipelines aims to do. So I'm really happy to hear you say that, Scott, because it culminates kind of everything that I've worked on as a PM on the team since its conception. So.
So if I go back in the day here to an MVP summit, well, I'm guessing you're probably at college, just on the amount of hair you have compared to me. But I remember being at summit and like saying, "Hey, we are in a room full of MVPs. These are some of the smartest, most knowledgeable expert matter subjects in the world on the CRM platform at the time. And how many of them in this room say they have a good ALM process?" I was like, I maybe can get 5 people out of the 30 or 40 in the room to raise their hand. And it's like, we need help on that. And then someone else, another MVP said, and we need to be it just works. We need to think about it. And I was like, that's not possible. That won't happen. You proved me wrong. Where I mean, you can't do everything, but you tackled what you could. And for the large majority of that, I think this is going to do it all for them, and they don't have to think about it, which is pleasantly surprised. So yes,
yeah, that's the goal. So, and that's awesome to hear too.
Anything else that we're missing, Anthony? Anything else that you're like, hey, I wanted to talk about this, and Daryl and Scott asked too many questions. What do we got? Anything else, or we covered everything, and everyone's just be excited and yeah.
I feel like I walk away from every conversation saying, yeah, I think I covered everything, and everyone should be excited. So,
that's good. That's perfect.
It sounds like a wonderful job.
Yeah, well, I say that, and then of course I'll lay awake at night and be like, oh shoot, I forgot to talk about this. But no, I think we've covered everything. And of course, if I didn't cover something, check out the blog post, check out all the release details that we've made, and I can provide that to you all. Or you can go to aka.ms/pipelines4all to check out the blog post I made. And look forward to the future general availability release that's coming this month.
Awesome. Okay, so if people want to, you have a link there. We'll share it in the show notes, I'm sure, for where to go to find more information. If they have feedback or want to get a hold of you, maybe particularly, how would they do that?
There are a couple of channels. Honestly, and I might regret this later, my email is always open. So I would be completely okay with sharing that. I don't know if you get like comments that I could help reply to.
If we do, I will definitely, if we have any comment on that, I'll definitely redirect you to it. So, but yeah.
We don't
get
I'm always open to feedback. Yeah.
We get some. Cool.
Yeah. I think that also feedback is so important to me, because I love talking to customers. I love listening to the good, bad, the ugly of whatever we're releasing, whatever is in the works. I want to know what their priorities are, and if they align with our priorities, which ideally they do. But it's good to hear from a diverse group of people. I feel like it's really important to make sure that we're covering everyone in these scenarios, especially for something like Pipelines for All or pipelines in general. Like it's something that we want to democratize truly and make it easier without having to think.
And I mean, it's a great name. It may just be pipelines for most today, but that's fine. Like we're moving forward, you know.
Oh, it's catchy though, Daryl. Isn't it? Really, let's face it.
Well, Anthony, it was great getting to meet you at Summit. I don't know if I actually talked to you very much. I at least attended when your session there, and it's even greater to be able to spend some time kind of 2-on-1 here on the podcast. And thanks for coming on. I appreciate it immensely.
Yeah, thank you all for the opportunity. It's been great.
Yeah. Well, Scott, if our listeners want to get a hold of us, how can our listeners do that?
Well, Daryl, yes, you can email us at cast@xrmtoolbox.com or get us on socials at XrmToolCast. And yeah, do let us know if there's any of those scenarios about data or anything else, any other feedback for Anthony, or just to tell us how amazing the episode was and how much you loved it. That we'd love to hear that as well. The shameless plug for an episode of the Low Code Revolution I'm doing with Shan MacArthur. It's going to be released shortly. And we're talking on very, very similar topics of this about solution management, and it's going to be a series that I'm going to be doing with him on some other things, maybe dependency management in the future. So watch out for that. But Anthony has been it's absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about pipelines for all. It's really fantastic to see, and I've learned a lot as well. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, thank you very much, Anthony. Talk to you later. Bye.
Cool. Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.
This has been the XrmToolCast with Daryl Labar and Scott Durrell. Produced by Lynn Zawin. If you have any questions or suggestions, please send them to cast@XrmToolbox.com, tweet @XrmToolCast, or hit us up on our LinkedIn XrmToolCast page.